Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom. Welcome to my podcast, where we will go deep into the lair of the purple worm instead of down into the rabbit hole, where we'll voyage into the astral realm of my mind and explore the verse of nerd culture. This is Phantom Thoughts. Okay, so I fibbed a little bit at the end of my intro there. The next segment is not going to be Joe from Hindsightless call-ins. It's going to be, well, I got a topic I want to discuss, and then I'm going to go to a call-in from Goblin's Henchman, which I will explain a little bit more after that call. But what I want to talk about now is a subject that seems to have been making the rounds in the Anchor Sphere a little bit. I've heard it talked about on Random Screed, Plundergrounds, and the Down in a Heap podcast. One of the initial Down in a Heap podcast episodes from quite a while back now actually prompted me to make my first episode cover this topic, and that's the topic of critical hits. And a lot of people seem to be kind of down on critical hits and the notion that if you use critical hits in combat, that it's going to favor the opponents of the PCs, because the thought is that there will always be more monsters than PCs, more creatures than PCs, more opponents than PCs in a lot of combats, and therefore they have more opportunities for critical hits and to do more. And I covered my thoughts on that in my first episode, so if you'd like to go back and take a listen to that, one thing I will bring up here is more rolls may mean more opportunities for critical hits, but it also means more opportunity for fumbles if you're using the fumble rule. So that could be a little balance. But of course, then you come to the problem with, and this is also covered on some of these podcasts, if you have a fumble, something bad happening to your character, at the very least not being able to act. And I know there's an actual play podcast I listen to called Nerd Poker that the DM there, he has, it actually adds a role, which I know would be an anathema to some people, adding another role to combat in what they're running 5th edition D&D. So running 5th edition D&D and having an additional role anytime you have a critical hit or a fumble. And he has a chart, and, but it comes out pretty interesting. I mean, I think you have to roll really high to get a really bad result on the fumble table, or really high to get a really good critical hit. Usually it's just you're doubling your dice damage, or you muff the attack. His basic fumble rule is you just muff the attack, not even you dropped your weapon and you got to pick it up next turn. So in that idea, he's trying to add fun, a little more fun with it, a little more excitement, and the occasional humorous, semi-humorous. With their group, it works because there's a lot of professional comedians in there, so they like to play up the humor. So the humor of a fumble can be, it can be a Three Stooges type thing. But what I wanted to talk about was one of the things that has been mentioned as a solution to the problem is only having PCs be able to do critical hits, or only having PCs and big bads and lieutenants and stuff of creatures and monsters and NPCs be able to do critical hits, and that just the minion level, the mook level guys, they can't, critical hit. And I've got to thinking, and this is something that's been worming its way in the back of my brain for a while now. I think that would be, I wonder if you could go more specific. Not even all PCs, maybe martial classes. Because, martial classes, combat is supposed to be kind of a specialty of theirs. And especially in more OSR type games, where there's the problem, and see the quotes over problem because you may consider it a problem or not, of, what is termed the linear fighter versus the exponential magic user, where as a fighter and a magic user in the older school versions of games progress through levels, the fighter is just doing more damage, a little more damage, because they're getting an extra attack here and there as they progress, versus magic users being able to suddenly unleash, these massive damage spells using the higher spell slots. And I got to thinking of, if you consider both of those things an issue, just having all combat with, especially melee combat, have critical hits available to whoever's using it. If you consider that a problem, and if you consider the fighter's progression in dealing damage compared to other classes, thief, backstab, magic user spells, cleric spells, to be a problem, could critical hits be a solution for that? Could it be a situation where, martial, the martial class of fighter in most of your OSR rules, or even in 5th edition, say fighter, barbarian, and monk, which for the most part don't have access to, unless they pick a specific subclass, don't have access to those more potent spell effect type effects. Could that be a sort of a more of a leveling for them? So say for example, for 5th edition monk, it might only apply to their unarmed strikes. And they can get multiple unarmed strikes, so they have multiple opportunities for critical hits. Fighters, they have the opportunity to give themselves an action surge and take more attacks, and they would end, in the 5th edition, they would end with more attacks than pretty much anybody as they progress through levels. So, more opportunities in combat, more opportunities to roll dice. And barbarian, I think you could do something similar. Maybe if you wanted to taper it off for the barbarian a little bit, because they do get some other things they get to do. You could say it's when they're raging, they have critical hits. Or maybe when they have raging, critical hits have even a heavier effect. And it would depend on how you do the critical hit. Are you going to say critical hit is max damage automatically? It's max damage and then roll a die. It's doubling the dice you roll. Like I said, maybe with a barbarian raging, maybe it could be you roll the dice 3 times. Or you have max damage and then you roll the dice twice and use that. It's kind of a advantage mechanic. You roll 2 more dice and you take the higher of that. Those are just some ideas. I also thought it could be tied to magic weapons. Magic weapons could have some kind of, for classes that know how to use them. So again, I'm thinking fighter, especially in the OSR. Maybe fighter cavalier, if you're doing the 1st edition type thing. And maybe fighter, cavalier, barbarian, monk. But if you have some sort of magic weapon, it could have some sort of a special effect when it hits a critical hit. Something that can give the extra oomph, particularly at higher levels, the higher level magic use. Maybe if you know what you're doing with a weapon, if combat is your role in the party, that's your class role, maybe the pluses turn into, instead of the pluses being to damage, it's plus that many dice to damage. So a +3 sword that as you achieved a higher level, you get a critical hit. Now you're rolling 3 dice for damage. Just a thought I had. I wanted to just append that to the beginning of the episode before getting into the calls. And now this first call is going to be from Goblin's Henchman, and then we'll go to Joe, and then we'll finish up with Kevin and Spencer. All right. So on this episode, we've got a lot of call-ins. Most of them have to deal with some of the topics I covered in my last episode. I do have one call-in it's a response to a call-in that I did. I listened to a show. I called in that show. I got a call-in response. So that was pretty cool. And I think it's a pretty cool episode of that show. So I want to share the call-in, which is probably not going to make a lot of sense just by itself. And I'm going to put it in a little bit of context and direct you to that other show because I think it's definitely something to check out. That's going to be the call-in from Goblin's Henchman of the Goblin's Henchman podcast. I also have calls from Joe of Hindsightless, responding to my, I guess you could call it a review, or at least an overview of Space Kings in my last episode. And I have call-ins from Kevin of the Red Caps podcast and Spencer of the Keep Off the Borderlands podcast, responding to the idea of bad actors and such in the OSR. Specifically responding to Joe's call-in to my last show, but also just information in general. And something that the three calls from Joe, Kevin, and Spencer kind of have in common, I think, at least in my brain, is the notion of sort of the circles that we run in. And you don't ever necessarily know what circles other people run in. We all have this, I think we all have, maybe it's just me, of kind of categorizing relationships or people we know or people we follow. Okay, this is a sci-fi person. This is a fantasy person. This is somebody that likes Douglas Adams. This is somebody that likes the OSR. This is somebody that likes Dungeon Crawl Classics. Things of that nature. And it's easy enough to think that the circles that we run in are maybe the predominant circles in that sphere. I don't know if that's necessarily true. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on anything that anybody is about to say. I like these guys. I listen to these guys all the time. I have great respect for these guys. They've all been doing this a lot longer than I have. I think they're all a little deeper into the community, the Anchorite community, and the various role-playing communities than I am. So certainly they have insights that I'm not going to have. But I think it is worth listening through here with the idea that we, all of us, Joe, Kevin, Spencer, myself, we're all speaking from our own experience and our own ideas, and we're all bringing our own viewpoint to conversation, which is one of the reasons why the call-in aspect of Anchor is so great and why it's so nuts that the Anchor apocalypse is occurring, where you can't just be driving around listening to podcasts on your phone, or at work listening to podcasts on your phone, or waiting somewhere for some kind of appointment listening to podcasts on your phone, and just respond through the Anchor app to the person that's podcasting, because now you have to go to the website, you've got to have a good connection so that you can get a good message off, or you have to find another way to send a message, and we're tooling through that as a community. And I'm rambling on, so I'm going to get to the calls. First up is going to be Joe from Hindsightless. I don't know if I said his podcast before. He's from the Hindsightless podcast, and he's responding to the Space Kings overview that I gave in my last episode.
Hi, Pink Phantom, Goblin Henchman here. So, yeah, thanks very much for your message. Yeah, I think you're right. That's a really great idea, this idea that, where do magical creatures come from? They obviously have a sort of natural link into the plane of magic. I mean, whether you want to, I don't know how you hand wave that away or explain it, but that's just, that's just the way it is. That's how they exist. Maybe, they just don't exist. There's like a tendril that hunts out for a reservoir of a minimum size before they can come to life. But yeah, that's it might explain why some creatures are have natural abilities. Yeah, that's a really great idea. So yeah, thanks for that. And if you have any more on that lines, let me know. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
So what Goblin's Henchman is talking about there is a call that I made to him regarding a recent episode that he had. Actually, as of this podcast, it's like 3 episodes ago. It's episode 025. I'm sorry. It's episode 130, Unusable Magic System and Update. And in it, he ponders on the idea of there being a plane of magic, or a planet of magic. It could be a sphere, it could be a plane, where magic essentially rains down and it gathers in pools. So there's large pools, there's small pools, there's seas, there's oceans, there's lakes, there's ponds. And that when someone learns how to use magic, they tap into a reservoir of this magic. And some of the reservoirs are very shallow, and some of the reservoirs are very deep. And some of them fill quickly, and some of them fill slowly. And so that would And learning how your particular pool that you've tapped into works would temper how you could use your spellcasting ability. So if you had a pool, one of the things he talks about is if you had a pool that was very shallow but filled quickly, is you have somebody who could fire off very low level spells often. Whereas somebody that has a deeper reservoir but that doesn't fill as fast, they could fire off some more massive type spells, but then they would get to the point where they would be draining it faster than it's filling back up. And there was a lot more potential for different things about how aware would somebody be of what their pool was and how it worked, and would there be the possibility of improving a pool or tapping into somebody else's pool, how it would work more for clerics and those whose spell power casting ability comes from a deity or another, power of the universe type of thing, how that would work, how, is it something more of a deal where, if you follow my tradition, if you're doing what I want you to do, here's this reservoir and I will fill it for you, or something like that. Anyway, I don't want to give away everything he talked about, because he talked about a lot, and he was working through some of the thoughts as he went. And I like that kind of thing. I like hearing people work through it sometimes, as opposed to always just getting the straight finished product. Sometimes just hearing the thought process generates ideas, and it did for me, because I called in with an idea for how magical creatures, or creatures with magical abilities, or creatures that just, aren't really possible without magic, could work in that world. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes, probably to his podcast in general and to that specific episode. And it's something that I think everybody should go and check out.
Holy crap, dude. I didn't think I'd ever hear anyone in the Anchor Sphere talking about Space Kings, man. I love that game. I love those dudes, Kevin Cole that made the game, and his friends from the Continue show. I've been watching those guys for years and years. And first, Kevin was an editor on their show, and then they brought him on as a guest. He's on a few of their podcasts. They have actual plays of those guys playing. And I don't know if you've already talked about this, because I just got too excited. But they have actual plays on the Continue show, or the podcast Pretend Friends, of them actually playing Space Kings, and then they do a fantasy version of it as well. It's fantastic. It's hilarious. Yeah, man. I don't know. Like, I love these podcasts because I was like, holy shit. Fucking Pink Phantom rules. Sorry for swearing on your show. Anyway, dude. Pushing Up Roses also rules. Her episodes on Murder, She Wrote are some of my favorite things in the whole world. There's also a great podcast with Kevin, the author of Space Kings, called Goosebuds, where they read a bunch of the Goosebumps books. They've actually read through all of the Goosebumps books, and now they're brushing into other children's horror. Anyway, enough. Awesome to hear you talk about Space Kings, man. Take it easy. Peace out. Yeah, I totally should have listened to the whole episode. Of course you knew about the 10 Friends, man. Anyway, that was an awesome, awesome review on Space Kings. I haven't seen the actual book yet, but I agree with everything you said. Like, yeah, I feel like for an RPG book, it should give some instructions on how you actually build a character. I think that'd be super helpful. And having the character sheet in the book also seems, like a thing that should happen. So great job, dude. Thanks for putting that out there. And I hope Kevin and those dudes listen to this, because it was a really, really good episode and a super fair review. Anyway, man, take it easy. Peace out.
Thanks for calling in, Joe. Yeah, it really just go to show that you don't necessarily know what people are into until you get into that kind of conversation, and then it comes up. I really love that podcast. I love the Pretend Friends podcast. I wasn't actually aware of the Continue YouTube channel until you brought it up, and I looked it up. So that looks interesting, something to delve into. I've been following Pushing Up Roses on Twitter for I don't know how long, and I enjoy a lot of her YouTube videos as well. So yeah, it's even in the ever wandering realm of the internet, it is kind of a small world. And I'm glad you appreciated the overview of Space Kings. I think it is a good fun with friends system. It is a good, I don't know if you'd call it light. I mean, there's not a ton to learn. You're not going to be constantly flipping through the book if you have a character sheet with your abilities and stuff on it. So, but yeah, I think it's a nice little system, and it's something, one of those, like I said, it's the RPG equivalent of Beer and Pretzels war game. So, thanks for calling in.
Hey, it's Kevin calling in from the Red Caps podcast. Just wanted to say I'm listening to your most recent episode and wanted to reply to something that Joe said. The loudest voices in the OSR community are folks like Ben over at Questing Beast, Dungeon Professor, Hank Infernal, the Alexandrian blog, 10-Foot Pole blog, items like that. That's the positive, loudest voices in the OSR community. The negative stuff is not the loudest. It's not even the most prominent. It's a very niche minority, and it's only kept brought up because of the shock jock nature of how they operate and the fact that social media sites like Twitter thrive off of negativity. But the hobby as a whole, or the niche part of this hobby, is filled with really amazing people, and those I mentioned are just some of them. So I don't believe the negative folks are the most prominent ones at all.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Spencer here. I'm just listening to Joe Richter's call in about the OSR and having to talk about these bad actors, because I'm a big fan of Joe, and Joe knows this. But when I hear him talk about the OSR, it's not an OSR that I recognise. I mean, he mentions Benja Satanis, he mentions the new TSR guys. Now, the circles that I move in, these people are not welcome. They might have loud voices, but they certainly aren't popular voices. And I don't see any relationship between the OSR and what the new TSR guys are doing. They couldn't be further apart. They're completely different ends of, well, not even ends of the same spectrum, because I don't see that as being OSR whatsoever. Just my. Now I'm trying to think of kind of a Matt Mercer equivalent for the OSR. I don't think there's anyone really like that. I mean, it's a very different landscape looking at the OSR. It's a much smaller part of the gaming community. But I think about big voices within that. I think of people like Ben Milton, who I don't know if you're aware of Questing Beast. See, and this is the thing. I'm talking to somebody else who promotes the OSR seemingly, and I'm not even sure whether you are aware of the same people that I'm aware of. But yeah, Questing Beast has got nothing but good things to say about that style of play, and he's always promoting great material all the time. It's just, I don't know. It's just. I guess it looks very different from the outside. What can I say?
All right. To start with, Spencer had sent me a message on Discord after he sent those voicemails, and I'm just going to read it straight off. Hey, the Pink Phantom, I just sent you a couple messages, and I may sound a little animated or frustrated. However, those messages may come across, there's zero ill will toward Joe there. He's a good friend. So I don't think, Spencer, to me, they didn't come off that way. I thought you were just you were stating your opinion from your point of view and how you view the spaces of the OSR that you travel in, and that's perfectly acceptable. Well, okay, I'm saying acceptable like I'm the arbitrator of all things. I'm not. It's understandable, and I thought it was a good take overall. I am aware of Ben Milton and Questing Beast. I've watched quite a few of those videos, and I agree with both you and Kevin that he is a very positive voice for the OSR, and he's definitely prolific. And as far as the folks that Kevin mentioned, the Alexandrian and 10-Foot Pole blogs. I am aware of those, and I've read a lot of entries in those blogs. For those of you who don't know, 10-Foot Pole is kind of a blog version of Questing Beast, actually. There's a lot of reviews of OSR type material on there. And the Alexandrian, I think, is more in the mechanics OSR development type style, but there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it, the Alexandrian, and it's a long time blog for sure. He said something about Dungeon Professor. I'm not sure if he was talking about maybe Professor Dungeon Master from the Dungeon Craft YouTube channel. Because I tried looking up just Dungeon Professor, and I came up with one YouTube channel with one video from 2 years ago, and that was about it. So I'm not sure. So if that's not who that was, Kevin, let me know. If it was the Professor Dungeon Master for Dungeon Craft, I think he's really more of just a general D&D guy, and not necessarily specifically an OSR guy. I know there's a lot of OSR takes in his videos because I've seen them as well, but he also has just general advice for people running 5th edition, and some of it's I think is old school related, and some of it I think is not. I think it's just his style, which I think is a more old school style. Definitely, he's a long time Dungeon Master, but I think he approaches it from just this is D&D and this is how I D&D, and I don't know that he necessarily divides it as OSR or just 5th edition or whatever. And I could be wrong about that. I could be completely wrong about all of this. Also, I have no idea who Hank Inferno is. That's something else you could educate me on. Because when I looked up Hank Inferno, the two things that came up repeatedly were some kind of a roguelike called Hank's Inferno, and then a movie called Inferno starring Tom Hanks. So if you could clue me on that, I would appreciate that as well. I'm always willing to check out different voices. And I think that all of this is kind of goes to show it's all in the circles you travel in. Certainly, these voices are prominent for some people, and they're not going to be prominent for others. I think that Joe's take is different, and I think it's going to be different because, and again, this is just me, I see Joe as not an OSR guy. He's an RPG guy. If you were going to pigeonhole him, you might say he's a Pathfinder guy because he plays a lot of Pathfinder. He had the first ever live play Pathfinder 2 podcast, which is quite a feather in the cap from my point of view. If you do something first and it's something that you actually go out and do for long periods of time. I've listened to a few episodes of that. I haven't listened to all of it. I probably need to go back and listen to more. My podcast listening time has really been getting filled up over the months and years as I've discovered more and more podcasts. And I do want to just kind of throw in here before I continue rambling on. If you like Ben Milton, Questing Beast, and what he does, and you like 10-Foot Pole and, those kind of reviews on blogs and stuff, a good podcast to listen to is Wobblies and Wizards. It's a podcast on Anchor, and it's a daily podcast, and a lot of it is either reviews of products or interviews with people who are putting out products, mainly aimed at a more OSR style. So it's a very interesting podcast. It's something, and it's really short. Most of them are 15, 20 minutes. Occasionally they might run to a half hour. So it's definitely something worth listening to. And I think getting back to the idea of the spheres we walk in, and what Kevin said about, the shock jock mentality. Well, the reason a lot of people do shock jock is because it works. I mean, if it didn't, people wouldn't be doing it anymore. I mean, the idea of shock jock goes back to radio, and I don't know how deep into radio it goes. I just know it was a thing when I was growing up, listening to, I think a lot, I heard it more in the 90s, but I think it was something that was in the 80s as well. And, a lot of it is where you get your information. A lot of it is the circles you follow. The Alexandrian and 10-Foot Pole are blogs. how many people outside the OSR read a lot of blogs? I don't know. But, the people that I follow on the more social media, I guess, like a Twitter or something, you don't see a lot of talk about blogs. You see people promoting podcasts. You see them promoting YouTube channels. You might see them promoting a game directly, or you might hear them talking positively or negatively about a specific author or specific video maker or specific podcaster or specific creator or a group of creators or a company in a positive and negative manner. And yes, Twitter and Facebook and all that, they're all about the drama because, drama sells. Drama draws attention. Drama keeps people scrolling. Drama makes people mad and makes them respond, which triggers the algorithm and says, oh, this kind of stuff is getting a response, so we're going to throw it to everybody's feed. So if you're looking for big voices in the OSR, blogs are big voices. In the rest of the RPG community, are they? I don't know. I don't know that I could name too many blogs that are non-OSR type blogs. But then again, I'm a guy that the things I respond to, I'm probably going to get a more OSR type voices in my feeds. So those are the blogs I'm going to find. And the OSR I think it was built a lot on blogs. It was built on blogs and message boards. And especially when G Plus was in the business, and they also owned Blogger at the time. They still own it, but those two things work together. So you have all these Blogger blogs, all these Blogger blogs that ended in .blogspot.com and G Plus, where you could follow them and talk to the creators and go back and forth. And so the OSR, I think it's in the history of the OSR that a lot of the community was built on the G Plus platform before it went away. So yes, they are big voices, prominent voices, loud voices in the OSR, but are they loud OSR voices in the greater RPG community? And I think that's really the question, and I think that's a good debate. And again, I view Joe as a non-RPG guy. So if a big voice he knows as a big voice in OSR is Venger Satanis, then maybe those are the voices that are getting more play in non-OSR circles, even if within OSR circles, their following and their influence is very small. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. We'll probably find out more about the things I don't know what I'm talking about in October when we're going with talking about the OSR in October and OSR. And now I'm just rambling again. But I guess the point is, trying to bring it back to the beginning, is we all travel in different circles. And, it's almost like people are Venn diagrams or are parts of Venn diagrams. We're the circles in the Venn diagrams. And there are places where we overlap greatly, and there are places where we overlap a little, and there are places that we don't even touch. And that's why I think it's a discussion worth having. That's why I think it's good to have a month to promote OSR, and especially positive OSR. And as part of that, maybe to promote the Alexandrian and 10-foot pole and Questing Beast and Wobblies and Wizards and our fellow anchorites and anything else that we can promote that is positive toward the OSR, to show that the OSR is positive. But I think discounting the people who are intentionally divisive and intentionally gatekeeping within the OSR and just saying, well, they don't represent us. I'm not saying we should talk about them at all, I guess is what I'm trying to get to. They're going to have their say, they're going to have their day, and they don't need us to speak out to enlarge their voices with our own, but at the same time, we need to be aware they're there and not just say, yeah, they're not really a thing, because at some point it's probably going to come up in a conversation. If you're having a conversation with someone that's not an OSR person, well, we heard that OSR people are gatekeeping. And it goes beyond the brand name voices too. It goes to, I mean, let's face it, the derogatory term neckbeards was not come up just for a handful of people. It was come up for a lot of common experiences that some people that were newer trying to get to know the old school style play, or maybe just getting into RPGs in general, ran up against with older, longer term folks and the negative experiences that they had. And what we want to do is show through just the plethora of our own voices that that's not normal. We may know that's not normal. We may know that's not that common, but we need to show it's not that common to the rest of the RPG community. And I think that's a great thing for the OSR promotion of OctoSR to be about, to show the not just the positive light of the gaming aspects, but the positive light of the community. And I guess that's all I don't know how to finish this podcast. Okay. I'm going to finish the podcast by saying podcast is over. I'd like to thank Kevin from the Red Cats podcast, Spencer, a.k.a. Free Thrall from the Keep Off the Borderlands podcast, Joe from the Hindsight List podcast, and Goblin's Henchman from the Goblin's Henchman podcast for calling in. Really appreciate it, fellas. It gave me a lot to think about and a lot to try to kind of work out for myself for this episode. And yeah, I hope everyone else out there listening got something out of this podcast. If you did, you want to give me a call, you want to send me a message, I'll get you on. Take care. And that's going to do it for another episode of Phantom Thoughts. If you have any feedback you'd like to leave, you can contact me by leaving a voice message at anchor.fm/the-pink-phantom, or you can send an email to thepinkphantom1@gmail.com, or you can contact me on Twitter @thepinkphantom. The music in this episode was Strength of the Titans and Late Night Radio by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license from creativecommons.org/licenses/by/4.0.